Hello, everybody.
Welcome to IOC podcast number 2.
I
Number
think
three.
number
Oh,
three.
number 3.
Wait,
Number
no,
3.
I think it's number two.
No, it's number three. We did intro, we did femininity, and now we're doing.
Mm.
And
Oh,
today we're talking about empiricism and rationalism. Woo! Well, actually, it's more like
Mhm.
empiricism and alternative forms of reasoning that
Mm.
include
Mm.
rationalism.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to today's talk.
Hmm. So before we start, how is everyone doing and where are you in the world?
I am
Just
still in Berkeley, California. Just vibing. Just vibing, but it's been a good summer so far. I'm doing well. And kind of like getting back into the groove of things. So things have been
Mm.
fun recently.
How's your week been since we last spoke?
My week, it's been really good. It's been a really good week. I can share more about it later to you guys.
Okay.
But a good week. And then I'm just kind of getting back into the routine of things and kind of returning to like ideas and consciousness stuff and also just like stuff in general that I've kind of taken a break from ever since school got out. So it's good. You just sometimes just got to give yourself some time to just kind of like recover from end of year burnout, time to like reflect and stuff.
Hmm.
So I'm ready.
Nice.
And
Um,
you, my friends?
well, it is. I'm still in Sydney. This is like my last full week here, which is crazy.
Mhm.
I had a final yesterday, so that's good. One final out of two out of the way. It is 11:41 a.m. for me, so still ahead time zone wise. Yeah, yesterday I went social dancing, which is like my favorite thing to do ever. And I was there for like from 6 to like 11:30. So yeah, it was really fun. And it was one of probably like the last, because like most of my friends here are from like dancing society. So it's like my last time seeing a lot of them, unfortunately. But it was very cute.
oh,
Yeah.
sentimental.
Hmm.
Nice. Um, is there anything else you wanted to share about life updates?
Mm, I mean, I feel like kind of because I just finished my final, so I'm like, and my next final is like in over a week, so I feel quite free right now. I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna be doing, but it's not gonna be studying for a while.
Nice.
Hmm.
That's good. You
Uh,
deserve to enjoy your final time in
I
Sydney.
know it's weird. I'm like, this is my
Mhm.
last Sunday. Actually, it's not true, but um, yeah, it's like my last time doing things, which is weird. But yeah.
okay. I wasn't sure. I wanted to make sure that you didn't have anything additional to tell us or update us. Um, I'm in. I'm now in upstate New York, not New York City, which is beautiful countryside and mountains of New York State. It's 9:43 p.m. now. I also wanted to point out how we had a conversation at one point where we were in even more sporadic time zones when I was in Europe, and that was
Mm.
very difficult to coordinate, but we still made it happen. So I'm just thinking how funny it is that we've been talking to each other and keeping in touch throughout all of the different time zones that we are all in.
Mhm.
Um, I got here and went for a little jog and then went swimming, which was really nice after being in the city for the past 2 weeks. And I have two friends from California visiting, so it was fun to show them the city. Um, and then the last big update I have for since last time is that I decided to retire for this summer, in that
Mm.
I'm like offloading as much of my ambition that I pursued during my gap semester and kept myself on a pretty rigid schedule with making progress in a lot of different areas, and realized that for me to succeed next semester, I need to stop doing all of the progress and reflect on everything I've done in the past 3 years of college and the 2 gap semesters I've taken, and the personal, academic, professional growth I've done. I've had so much growth so far, and I haven't really taken any serious time to reflect. And overall, I'm just in a very reflective mood, thinking about a lot of things. So decided that I would just deprioritize and relax, other than IOC and my now 25-hour per week job instead of full time. So yeah.
Nice. Very important to have the time to integrate and reflect.
And that's about all I have on my end
Beautiful.
that I want to share right now.
Yeah, I'm kind of blanking like that. I know there's more stuff, but it'll come out in conversation.
Yeah. So anyways, we can get started with the topic of the day: empiricism and rationalism. Woo! Or mostly empiricism.
So what is empiricism?
Yeah, so let's get started with a good old definition. Well, I guess I will debrief what we'll be talking about. What is empiricism and its huge logical fallacy, other forms of reasoning, and then we'll dissect and talk about the things that we have defined more in depth, and talk about broader implications and personal implications, and reflect. Oh, but first I wanted to start with a warm-up topic, which is what is knowledge and what is truth, because today we'll be talking about forms of reasoning, and I would define forms of reasoning as methods to gain knowledge and understand truth. And so if we'll be talking about that, it's important to be on the same page about how we define knowledge and how we define truth.
I remember our last conversation about this. There was an interesting piece, but I forgot what it was about.
I think we began with talking about truth.
Yeah.
And the difference between lowercase truth and uppercase truth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it's kind of about subjectivity, because truth is different for every person. Whereas, I mean, yeah, I do think people can have different truths, and two things can be true at the same time, even if they're opposites.
Are you thinking of a specific example?
Yeah, I think I've just been noticing two things can be true at once, where it's if if I like pickles and you don't like pickles, then those two things can exist, and pickles can be good and bad at the same time. And that's how truth can be subjective, because it yeah, that's, and I think capital T truth is universally true things, I think this is a universal truth, that everybody wants to feel love, for example, or people don't or actually, I think people want to feel love is a universal truth, capital T.
Yeah, except for psychopaths.
But I would still argue that they still want to feel love. They all kind of want.
I don't think they know what love is on a subjective level. They can't. I don't think they understand what love is.
I feel like you can still not understand what it is, but still want that. You know, you could. And love doesn't just mean like romantic, like it could literally mean like compassion as a form of love.
Yeah, I guess it's one example that falls on the edge
Hmm.
of general humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about if capital T truth exists universally.
And I guess relating it back to like empiricism, it could be like a capital T truth is that light travels at like, what is it, 9.8 something meters per second? Like that is a capital T truth that is universal and consistent. And like that's why a lot of science uses like light as measurement, like science of like in space and measuring like the expansion of the universe is all based on like how light travels.
Right, but for people who don't view science as capital T truth,
Mm-hmm.
that is not capital T truth. And
That
so
light that light travels. I think that is capital T truth, or like the properties of elements, for example, is like a capital T truth. Could be. Because
I
it's
feel like
something.
another good question here would be what is fact? So I feel like
Mm,
that's what's kind of compared a lot with truth, you know? And I think
yeah.
truth and fact both go under the umbrella of like knowledge. Because I see knowledge as kind of what we know about the world, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think truth has, I don't know, when I think of truth, I think a lot of times it's like you can only think or believe something is true on your own terms, you know?
Yeah.
So I do think truth is something that is subjective because it could even be something factual, but people still have the ability to decide if that is true for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
And then
think
fact,
like
yeah. But of course,
yes.
I guess like yeah, if we want to talk about like capital T, that's interesting, like the capital T truth, you know. Then we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about like universal truths and stuff. What that's what usually capital T is like used for, right? For like universal truths. But um
I'm
I
under
don't
the
know. What's
firm
like what's
belief I'm under the firm belief that at this current point in my journey that there's no such thing as universal truth because there's always going to be an exception to capital T truth, like something
Mm.
that there will always be an exemption from that. For example, for the light example, the speed of light example, there will be people who don't believe that they won't believe in science or they won't believe that light travels at 9.8 meters per second.
Mm.
Which I
But
don't
like
think that I don't think I don't think the speed of light is 9.8
yeah,
meters per
I
second.
mean that was just a random number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But whatever the speed of light is, there's definitely going to be people. Same with the capital T truth that the earth is round. There's people who don't believe in that, and there's
But
people and they have reasons for that leads them to such a conclusion.
I think the difference though between like what makes it a capital T truth is that like you don't have to believe it for it to be true. Like it doesn't have to come from a belief system or an ideology. So it's like whether you believe it or not, light does travel at that speed. Like whether you believe it or not, the earth is round. Like, it's like things where whereas like things that are more subjective or things that is knowledge produced from belief systems and ideologies could fall into like lowercase t.
Mm-hmm. Knowledge from ideologies as opposed to subjective experience.
Mm.
As opposed to ideologies dash subjective experience as opposed to what?
Yeah, and like I also believe that science is an ideology and a belief system. So,
Sorry, I was asking a clarifying question.
oh,
Like
okay.
knowledge derived from ideologies and subjective experience, as opposed to knowledge derived from what?
Um, from like capital T truth, like things that are like indisputable.
But
Or
if science is an ideology, then what distinguishes that to make it capital T truth from lowercase truths?
I guess just like um I'll answer that with another example because I think a capital T truth is that change is the only consistency. Because I was gonna say that capital T truth are things that are consistent, but that's not true because everything is not or like you can't say anything is consistent other than the fact that there is change. So I think a capital T truth is like something that is indisputable like that. Or it's like and a capital T truth is that we're all gonna die. Or like we are all mortal.
Well, I think we should stick to
Okay,
one
we're getting pretty
example.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we should
Okay.
stick to one example because my I'm playing devil's advocate here, by the way,
Mhm.
and I want to like dissect
It.
this idea to the point where we can agree on some concrete
Mm.
conclusion. So like let's just stick with one example. Like I think the earth is round is a good simple one
Mm.
that
But
we can stick to.
I feel like it's a bit too simple to be honest. Because you
Okay.
can't really like I feel like that is it's like I don't know. I feel like for talking
So
about
yeah,
the
what are you guys sorry. Yeah, what are you guys saying about that statement? So is that statement knowledge or truth? Just to catch up.
Um
Sorry.
no, I'm trying to distinguish between like what is the difference between lowercase truth and what makes something uppercase truth?
Okay.
I
Like what is
feel
the
like
criteria for something to be uppercase truth if science is an ideology as well as all the other forms of ideology? And that makes one's belief in science subjective and therefore lowercase truth and not uppercase truth. Did that make sense? Or should I
yeah.
repeat my
I
idea?
I mean I think it's just like to be honest, like you could just argue back and forth about lowercase and uppercase truth. And I think rather than like trying to define it, it's more of um like I don't think it needs a definition, rather it needs like understanding. So like
Mhm.
I think as long as we can understand the difference, not necessarily like put it into a rigid category and definition,
Or
then that
understand
is
the
like
purpose that these words play.
yeah,
Yeah.
like then I think that's kind of
Okay.
like answering the question rather than like creating a criteria for what qualifies capital T versus lowercase t. Like I feel like it's more productive
Mhm.
to just distinguish the differences and like understand why they're a bit different rather than like, does that make sense?
Because who are we to
Yeah,
say, Yeah.
except for me, I think that if you give anything enough thought, everything is actually just lowercase truth and nothing is actually uppercase truth. So I don't really believe that uppercase
Mm,
truth exists. And that's kind of why I think that I want to know your thoughts on that thought.
I disagree.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah, I
why
mean,
I'm
who are
trying
we
to
to say
narrow
what exists or
that's
not
why
exists?
Yeah.
All
that's why
labels
I'm trying
exist.
to narrow
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to narrow
All
down
words exist
criteria
only
because it's
because
like
that we give meanings to words.
Yeah, and it's like I think we just both have different meanings of that word and that's okay.
yeah, I was just trying to narrow in on what distinguishes the two. But if it's just a sentiment,
Yeah, like I do think it because like it's gonna be different for each person. Like a capital T truth for me. For example, if I believe that like all human beings ultimately want to feel love, but a sociopath doesn't, and that's okay. They can have a different capital T.
Okay, because I thought that capital T truth means like a truth that is shared among everybody.
But I
And is
think that's
therefore
impossible. I don't think it can be shared among people, but as more of just like a law of the universe, even.
okay.
Because it's
So like
like,
a capital T truth is like a law of the universe for that person, and then a lowercase truth is just like something with less gravity.
yeah, I think I have a thought, but I really want to like say it in a way that makes sense because I think like to filter experience or to filter knowledge or information through the experience of a human is by default gonna not be like what we
Yeah,
perceive is all like what I perceive as love, like my daily experiences is being filtered through my ego mind, my body, my senses.
right.
And that is what makes so the capital T truth is what comes through, is the input, and the lowercase t is the output.
Okay,
If that makes
that's
sense.
interesting.
And like the machine that it passes through is each individual human. So we are going to process the capital T truth differently and create a different output that is informed by our culture, by our ideologies, our belief systems. So I guess a capital T truth is something that is like not influenced by those things that make us human. Oh my God, that's kind of complicated, but
Yeah, it is kind of complicated.
I personally don't really think in terms of lowercase and uppercase truth. The only thing I think of when we talk about that is usually I feel like uppercase truth is used in more like religious, like kind of like text or something like that. Like I feel like I never see like that really rising for like other than that.
really, I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I mean, I
There's like
guess,
scientific capital T truth.
but I think like
I
in
don't know what a
just
scientific
general
capital T
life,
truth is.
yeah, like it does come through in religious context, but it's also like because
Mm-hmm.
I experience it more in like spiritual context, which is the same thing as religion. It's just
Yeah.
not organized.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Okay, I would love to keep talking about uppercase, lowercase truth, but that's not really what we came to talk about.
Yeah, I was like, we could really, really pick it apart.
We could just let's just talk about capital and lowercase truth for the rest of the hour. Okay, I'm just going to move forward from that,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that we'll refer back to that conversation
Hmm.
moving forward. But
Yeah.
just to lay down a general definition for what empiricism is, it's the way of getting information, knowledge through our senses and our experiences. And the fallacy that empiricism has, and I'll preface this by saying that empiricism is the framework in which the scientific method stems from. And because in order to complete the scientific method, you set an experiment, you measure things, and although it's not through necessarily your direct senses, it's through methods of measurement that are either somewhat related to senses, right? Because mass is a sense, and any form of measurement involves some sort of sense, like vision when measuring length or time. All of these are just extensions of senses, and so wanted to lay that clarification before pointing out a major flaw in empiricism, which is derived from this principle called the principle of independence. And it's saying that in order for some form of reasoning to be logical, it you need to have your reasoning be from something independent, from an independent source. For example, an example of the violation of the principle of independence is saying the New York Times is valid because I read in the New York Times that it is a valid source. And that's circular reasoning. Not satisfying the principle of independence. And likewise, for empiricism, the logic, the rationale for empiricism being a valid form of reasoning is also reliant on circular reasoning, because empiricism is the method in which you observe things in order for them to be true. And the logic for empiricism being valid is that in the past you have observed that it has been true. Using empirical reasoning has led to truth. And that's circular reasoning, because you're relying on empirical reasoning in order to conclude that empiricism is a valid form of reasoning. So that's a big flaw that nobody likes to talk about or nobody realizes, because it's a little difficult to wrap your head around. But that's what empiricism is. Any comments? Oh, Sam, I think
for me, I see our discussion today on just kind of the idea of like empiricism and rationalism, and just kind of like the purposes that the approach that both take on like kind of looking at the world. So like in my opinion, I do not, obviously, and I think we all agree that there's nothing fully wrong with empiricism. It's just the fact that empiricism often is like kind of associated with like how we conduct scientific knowledge about the world and stuff, you know? And so yeah, I guess like empiricism is interesting that it depends on like our senses, you know, and like I guess that goes toward, you know, for me, something I've been thinking about is just kind of like why certain senses are like not, you know, like prioritized more by humans, you know, compared for like they're all of species, like they have different senses, you know, and they use their senses differently to like understand and exist in the world. And I feel like for humans, a lot of like our sense relies on sight. And I think that's why it kind of a lot of times goes along with like science. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's interesting too, because I learned a fun fact that crows and worms are actually iridescent, but we just can't see it because it's outside. Or like their true color is like outside of what we can visually perceive. So it's like, yeah, if we do like rely or like kind of use one form of like sensory observation and like glamorize it is not the right word, but like I like prioritize it. It is like super limiting, and then we will be like, oh, like the whole circular reasoning thing, because it can be like, oh, like I see that crows are black, like their feathers are black, and then you're like, I also see that crows are black, and it's like validated by all of our senses, which is like what science is. It's like we repeat it and everyone can agree that this is all what we are observing. But it's like doesn't necessarily mean that crow's feathers are black, because to them they're rainbow. And like that is a flaw in, or like that is not the truth of what the color of crow's feathers are, because it's different even just among species, because we have like limitations on how we sense and perceive things.
Yeah, that literally ties directly to what we were just talking about, but I'm not going to tangent away from that. So I wanted to introduce a few more alternative forms of reasoning. One, the main, I wouldn't call it an opposite, but then the other main form of reasoning in philosophy, in Western philosophy, is rationalism, which is the flip of empiricism. Empiricism says you derive knowledge from your senses, and rationalism says that the way to gain knowledge is through reasoning. And a really interesting thought that I like to think about is if someone lived in a void and had no sensory experience whatsoever, would they have thoughts and would they be able to gain knowledge through reasoning?
I find that hard to grasp because I think if someone lived in a void, then like, what are they? Like, are they even human? Are they even sentient? You
True.
could argue. So it's like, would they even have thought? Who are they? What they do? Like, it just, I don't know. I find rationalism kind of, well, it's a bit confusing for me to understand. But
I see isn't rationalism, it's just like rationalism kind of depends. Wait.
yeah, like because
I feel
I
like
don't see how it's separate from empiricism. I feel like the
they
two
are
really
though.
go hand in hand. Yeah.
No, they're different.
It's more through
How?
complex thought, right? So
I feel like
Like,
rationalism can like be based on things that aren't immediately sensed through like our aren't
exactly, it's like
experienced through our
higher
immediate
levels,
senses, you know?
higher
can you
levels of
give
And
reasoning.
another
the
example other
power
than the
the power of
void?
kind of the human, I think rationalism is kind of like refers more to like the power of the human mind to be able to like have intuition about things or build knowledge about things based off of like human reason and like
Mm.
human intellect more so.
Right. You have like your direct
You can have
experience.
knowledge of things without directly experiencing it, I think.
Exactly. It's like the
So could you give
non-direct
an
reasoning.
example that's like common?
I think an example could just be how for rationalism for a rationalist might argue that there's certain innate knowledge that humans have. I think that could be like
Mm.
kind of a view of rationalism, maybe.
Right.
And
Or there's universal truths, maybe a rationalist would
Mm.
say.
because when I think of rationalizing. So like if you um if you're like, oh, these people are being loud while I'm trying to sleep, that means they don't care about me. Is that like a kind of like they don't care about me and my quality of sleep? So these people don't like me. Is that like a form of rationalism? Because it's not really based on senses, rather it's based on assumptions and like pre-existing frameworks.
Yeah, I think something you could highlight if as a rationalist is person, they're loud and you can either conclude that they don't care about you or they do care about you and they just don't realize that they're being loud. And the ability to take other factors that are not directly present into to affect your conclusion is a rationalist idea. Like, oh, person A who's being loud right now grew up in a house where it was always loud, and so it's not really inconsiderate to be loud when someone's trying to sleep. So I guess that they don't realize that they're being inconsiderate, and so they still do care about me. I just feel like, yeah, you know what I mean? So
Mm.
that's taking information that isn't directly available and isn't directly being experienced and being integrated to make a final conclusion.
Because I feel like rationalism is kind of, well, if empiricism is gaining information or knowledge through your senses, then like rationalism is just standing on the shoulders of that. Because it's like, how would you know that the person grew up in a loud household? Because you had conversations, because you've experienced it, you've like obtained this information through your senses and through, does interaction and like human interaction count as like a sensory experience? I think that's also something
That's a good
that could,
question.
because
That's a really good question.
like that then would change my perspective. But if it's because I think like when you do have relationships and connection, there is this like aspect that is not derived, or like this way of knowing that's not derived from the senses, like the direct like five senses of experiencing the external world, but like communication in general is listening. It's like that sense is activated, it's seeing, it's
But then there's intuition that plays into relationships and things that you can't place into a sensory experience, that you can't label as a sensory experience with relationships as well.
so then is that what rational thought is grounded in, is like the kind of non-external senses that we use, the internal senses rather?
Yeah, you could say that. I feel that's the thing. I don't think that rationalism and empiricism could ever be mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like that distinction that we just made, though, to how like empiricism kind of goes along. It relies on external senses, while rationalism makes room for both external and like internal senses. Whatever that might precisely mean, that's kind of generic still, but
Yeah.
I think that
I
kind
would
of
say
roughly.
that empiricism is for external senses and rationalism is for exclusively internal. But without empiricism, you wouldn't be able to have access to the internal senses. And without internal senses and without rationalism, you wouldn't be able to make any use of the external senses.
I think science kind of removes the internal senses, because like back in the day when they would just use their eyes to observe things and they're like, wow, like we are the center of the universe, like I can see that because the stars and planets revolve around me from my perspective, whereas and like that makes like that is informed by a sense or like an internal thing of like also like a confirmation bias where we believe we're really important, so that's why everything revolves around us, whereas science is like removes that internal bias and confirmation bias, and it's just like, actually, yes, the stars move but not around us, so it takes out the like emotive egoic inputs.
Yeah, there's definitely
That's
pros and
interesting.
cons to empirical dominant reasoning.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess you could, would you say the same as for rationalism? Is there danger in having rationalist like dominant thinking? Because
What would
also,
that
yeah, I
look
just like
like?
believe that, I don't know, yeah, exactly. Like I just believe that both are not like, one cannot exist on their own, and I think it's good to have a healthy balance of both. And I think a more rationalist versus empiricalist like approach is better in different scenarios. But I think there's definitely space for both in like science and also just like our own personal lives.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. Hmm. Yeah,
And I
it
feel like
is
it's
just
only when we see as one as universal or more true when like contradictions like occur and there's problems. But as long as
yeah.
we just acknowledge that, both exist and both are approaches to life.
Yeah. And there's just two of very many different forms of reasoning. So I think, yeah, like the problem that we have a lot is um I feel like prioritizing is not the word that I want to use, but it's like we kind of give more weighting to I can't find the word that is like what I'm trying to say. But I think like since empiricism is like the dominant form of reasoning and is seen as like a capital T truth form of reasoning, and all the rest are kind of inferior to it, is the problem. But yeah, like I think I'm listening to a podcast called Sand Talk. It's not a podcast, it's an audiobook. Sand Talk by, let me get the author's name. By Tyson Young Kapora. And it's the section I was just listening to is about yarning circles, which is like a form of knowledge creation and like transmission and development and sharing in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. And it's just very interesting on how they like build knowledge through, and it's like through oral conversation. And I think like that way of knowing it, and it's like it is something that they use a lot in scientific research and stuff because it's a valid form of knowledge generation. Um, like I think that is an interesting contrast because it is kind of a rationalist point of view that is existing in like an empirical space.
In that they're growing their knowledge base by conversing amongst one another.
Yeah, and it's like it's kind of where you sit together with people. There is no dominant leader or anything, but it's like building knowledge through experience. And like there's no like wrong knowledge unless it really does like contradict a lot of things. But it is like collaborative and generative knowledge
Couldn't you
sharing and
argue that
production.
it's the same among the scientific community where they have peer-reviewed papers and other
Yeah,
forms of knowledge generation among community?
definitely. But I think what's different is that like the scientific community, what was it? He was saying that they like science has decontextualized experience, so it isolates things and
Mm.
takes it out of context, whereas like indigenous ways of knowing and like oral knowledge transmission and stuff like really contextualizes knowledge.
Mm.
So the only
That's
way
super
it can
interesting.
exist, it's really like I want to re-listen to that chapter because it like kind of blew my mind. But like the only way for certain knowledge to survive is if it can be passed down through generations. And in order for that to happen, it has to be true. Or like it
Mm.
has to hold some
Well,
truth.
true.
Yeah. Or else like
True.
why would it get passed down? And it's like it's filtered through time and people and
Mm.
is like validated by being like, and you remember like if something is true or something is interesting or like sticks with you, like your brain just remembers it. But if things like don't really resonate or don't seem true, like your brain kind of just, and then that
Mm-hmm.
knowledge doesn't get passed down because it's not like contextually like relevant in the context of life.
Mm.
It's interesting to think about because on one hand, it's a beautiful form of knowledge formation and also a method to have a broader understanding of things. But a question I have is when to stick to empirical reasoning and when to use methodologies like that you were referring to just now, because I'm thinking specifically to what you said earlier about the discovery that the Earth is not at the center of the solar system and excluding the sticking solely to the empirical reasoning when coming to that conclusion was what led to
I
that
feel like
discovery.
I feel like I feel like rationalism is better when it comes to like more like ethical truths or things we cannot like directly know. So
Mm,
like I mean, so like I don't know, because I feel like I guess like just like my question is a lot of the times for this like topic, it's just like when did this like discussion on like the difference between empirical and rational like reasoning even like arise, you know? Like when did this like become a thing? And like I think a lot of it just comes along with like yeah, like I guess like how science came to be, right?
mm.
And like
Well, my book that I always talk about from like how Western thought originated, how it went from like
yeah.
mysticism to spirituality to religion to science, or sorry, to philosophy to science. Like I think it was just that natural progression of people like having some form of knowing and then being like, wait, this isn't the only way. So then they reject it and then try to develop their own like new way of knowing, and then they reject it, and it then like keeps building off of what existed before. So I think like rationalism is kind of like a rejection of empiricism and trying to like reframe like a way of knowing.
So moving forward, how does one determine when to utilize which form of reasoning and when to utilize, well, more like when to isolate and only use empirical reasoning?
When is that like I think yeah, I don't, this is gonna sound bad, but I just like, when is that useful to only use empirical reasoning?
I to, for example, to determine, to discover that the sun was in the center of the solar system, you had to isolate it from rationalist form of reasoning, from taking into account prejudices and societal pressure that all pointed towards the earth being in the center of the universe.
Mm.
And you had to solely focus on the empirical facts.
Well,
That's what led to that discovery.
I think it's important to also consider the context of like who created this theory that the earth was the center of the universe, because like a lot of other cultures didn't believe that. And like it's because um like it came from a place and a society that was like moving out of that um like way of thinking, like to a more empirical individualistic thought form, whereas like other cultures in the world knew that earth wasn't the center of the universe, because it's like they understand that there's no like hierarchical structure. So why would humans be at the top if we are all equal? Like we're connected with nature and like the weather and the stars and all that. Like we are not bigger, better than any of that. So why would we be at the center of the universe? Like that kind of knowledge was like obvious to some people. So it's like, I think that you don't need empiricism to come to that conclusion.
Well, you need it along with other
Yeah.
methodologies, and not to overvalue or
Yeah.
solely utilize, focus only on empiricism.
But like I don't think you had to like remove the human experience to understand that we weren't the center of the universe. Like I think we could very well be a part of that conversation. Like human beings are a part of the universe. We don't have to remove ourselves from it to know that we're not the center of it.
See, I'm the type of person where like what I believe is that Earth is the center of our universe. And that
Mhm.
like the best we can do in creating knowledge about the world is taking our inherent like taking our own subjective experience into account with our knowledge and regarding that as the closest to truth that we can get to. That's kind of my way of seeing the world. Because I do think Earth is the center of our universe, not center of the universe, center of our
Yeah,
universe.
I agree with
Because
that,
it's all that we
honestly.
can know. That's our standing point of looking at the universe from Earth's perspective, right?
Yeah. And like, what do you guys think about like using science and putting all this money into like exploring space in the universe? Like, do you think it's actually useful or relevant? Like,
I
I
don't
think it's relevant, but
I think it's valid for humans to have the desire to like explore further from the boundaries of our planet, especially if we seem like we have the capabilities to do so,
mm,
you know. I'm someone who I do believe in kind of pushing the boundaries of knowledge and stuff. But unfortunately
mm,
that's just what creates such a messy world, you know. So I'm not sincere like I'm not someone who believes in like inherent good or evil or stuff like that, you know. But
mm.
you know, so I understand, but it's unfortunate that like it's prioritized over like other things, of course, you know. but there's a lot of things that come into context as to why that there's like space exploration,
Yeah, definitely.
kind of. Because it gives like a sense of in a way, I wish we can kind of, I don't know, yeah. Maybe it's just, I don't know, yeah. Because I think just the way that well, I feel like this is so different from like whatever we were talking about, but I feel like in how space exploration came to be is like, I mean, it's like obviously something that it's just like done at like the higher levels, like people with money, people in control on planet Earth, right? And so like that's why it's kind of like so, like I don't know, but I feel like I'm just curious as to how space exploration is going to change in the future, kind of, and if
Yeah.
there's going to be kind of more approaches to it rather than just from like this sole like I don't know. I just feel like I'm just curious to see how space exploration changes over time and if it's even possible for it to change since it's so like you could only kind of be involved in space exploration if you have like the money and capabilities to do so, right?
Yeah.
But I think it would be really cool if there was kind of more of a different approach to it, right?
Yeah, that makes me think of like how a lot of empirical reasoning is inaccessible to lots of people because you have to have the privilege of having an education to understand, to like use the jargon and like understand the theories in the way where it's like you're learning a language to communicate with others, and some people can't learn that language just like systemically, like they don't have that opportunity. But yeah, I think it'd be because it's like there are lots of ways that cultures and communities have learned and explored space on Earth without using technology. Well, I mean, it depends on what you define as technology, like modern technology and like equipment. Um, I had another point, but I forgot.
Okay. That's all interesting food for thought. And I think time is passing and we should I'll just introduce the alternative forms of reasoning that are kind of scoffed upon, I think, by the scientific community, and that given our current discussion, it would be interesting to incorporate it in our forms of reasoning and knowledge formation processes. And so with empiricism having this flaw of with the principle of independence, it opens up doors to taking into consideration other forms of reasoning that before, for me at least, I didn't take with as much seriousness, including reading tea leaves, which says that a form of reasoning is to read tea leaves and make conclusions with it based off of what the tea leaves say. And then also the form of reasoning that is faith, which is obtaining knowledge by I'm just thinking about how you can describe the method of reasoning of faith. You form your knowledge by believing in a supernatural force.
Isn't that kind of rationalist because you're using like internal senses to inform?
I think so, because rationalism
Yeah.
is just basically like using the human, like what your way of rationalizing about the world. That's what rationalism is, and just like acknowledging it that is like valid, and
So
that is like the way that humans acquire knowledge about the world through
I think it
rationalizing.
overlaps between the two.
between empiricism even? How?
Yeah, because well, I think that specifically when it comes to religion, but also you could say faith. I don't want to generalize to faith, let's just say with religion, I think there's certain things that are empirical about religion. For example, the fact that each major religion has a text to refer to, and so you seek evidence from that text. And also, when it comes to miracles, religious miracles, that's a very good example of overlap between empiricism and rationalism, because they take this objective experience that's happening to them and then conclude that some supernatural energy or God is the force that led to that empirical experience.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My question though for the tea leaves is like, does obtaining knowledge versus believing in like the tea leaves, like I think those, or do you think that those are different? Because like if you like, what's the difference of like obtaining knowledge of something and then it affecting your belief system, if that makes sense?
Obtaining knowledge and it affecting your belief system. Could you
Like
elaborate on your
yeah,
question?
I think I want to rephrase it as like, how does knowledge become belief? So like, how does someone who reads tea leaves then believe what they see as truth?
So like what's the rationale for believing in tea leaves? Is that your question?
Or with anything, like what, like with anything, like if you see something and you have knowledge of it, what makes it become a belief? Is it like the repetition? Is it that it is true, or like it actualizes?
I think there's a lot of different ways to conclude something is true, to conclude that something is truth, or to conclude in a belief. And
Okay.
that's what I think, that's what a form of reasoning is. It's like what transfers something into a belief.
Yeah, because it's like, I feel like you can obtain knowledge on things but not believe in it. Like I feel like, because my like, it's, you can like read up the bottom of a coffee cup when you have Turkish coffee. Like my grandma does that, and we'll read it and be like, oh look, there's like a mountain, that means blah, blah, blah. But it's like I don't necessarily believe those things. It's like, yes, I've obtained knowledge that there is like a figure or a face that looks like there's a face in my coffee cup, and like I have knowledge like, oh, like maybe I will meet a tall handsome stranger, but like that doesn't necessarily like translate into my beliefs.
Well, I guess it depends on what your definition of knowledge is.
Yeah, back to question one.
Because I guess my interpretation of what knowledge is like, it's kind of the same thing as a belief. Like the coffee thing would be an experience, but it doesn't convert into the knowledge that you will climb a mountain or that you will encounter a tall, handsome stranger.
Yeah, I guess knowledge is, we didn't really like fully talk about that at the beginning, but it would have been good to kind of establish a ground for what that means.
Yeah.
But
That's besides the point, though.
yeah.
Yeah, I think all of these are different ways to come to the conclusion of your belief. Like tea leaves is a way to come to narrow in on a belief or knowledge,
But I guess
regardless of what your vocabulary is.
yeah, I guess that's my question, is like how does how or why did the tea leaves inform belief? Or like how and why? Oh, wait, hold on. I'm confusing myself. Let's just move on.
Okay. Like, how do you? I feel like you're just asking, like, how do you come to the conclusion that tea leaves are a valid way to?
But it's not just tea leaves. Like if you're taking any form of like pseudoscience, like how has that become a belief? Or like how are beliefs formed, essentially? And like kind of rather than just being like, oh, because it's like something that's driven by knowledge and blah blah, blah, but like the nuances of it. But we don't have to go into that of like how the nuances of belief formation
Well, I guess
take
belief
place.
is built off of one's rationale, right?
On one's
And
imperience.
yeah, because I think, but
And
then I
also
also,
it could just be that in the past the tea leaves have been correct at predicting one's future, an individual's future, and so therefore they conclude that tea leaves are an accurate form of reasoning, and that's
that
literally the same fallacy as empirical reasoning, and that's why reading tea leaves is as valid a form of reasoning as
yeah.
empiricism.
But then like with that, the observer effect comes into play, and it's like with empiricism and rationalism and faith, we all have this like observer bias and observer effect where it's like whatever we believe is what we're gonna see. And rarely do things conflict our beliefs because if it's what you believe, then that is your capital T truth. Or that is your lowercase t truth. So like I think when tea leaves become something you believe, it's informed by like faith, rationalism, empiricism, emotion, intuition, and it's all these things where it's like whatever you want to believe, you will see. And that kind of goes into, oh, this could open another door, but let's not go there, actually.
And that's the whole appeal of empiricism, is that the goal is to remove the observer effect.
But it's like an inherent part of like quantum physics, which is like
Yeah.
theoretical, but like true. It's like things behave differently when
And
being
also
observed.
to apply it to all things. Scientific progress stems from what was observed in the past. And so if there's something that points to a different truth, but it contradicts a lot of the things that were established in science in the past, that's literally an example of the observer effect, because you only see the potential possible explanations for this new phenomena based on previous scientific facts, and that narrows the potential understanding to only scientific fact as opposed to things that we don't things that are outside of the sphere of science.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, I feel like we should move on. Oh,
Yeah.
and wrap up soon.
Enough dissecting.
Yeah. Oh.
We already did that. So
Yeah.
so yeah, we can talk. I think we can talk about spend like 5 minutes just talking about some implications to some subject. We can talk about energy and
I want to do my podcast on this topic, so
okay.
next
So
podcast will be about this fully, but we can touch on it.
let's just decide on what we want to talk about. We can talk about energy and the implications of the idea that the world is composed of energy exchanges, ancestry and reincarnation, and whether empiricism and spiritual hypotheses mutually exclusive. We can talk about AI and consciousness, and if what composes the human experience is more than what we learn from our senses, what else is it? And what is meaning? And can AI attribute the same meaning that we experience? That's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Or we can
Well, I
dive
feel
into
like Oh,
Okay, do you
well,
want
this
to
is
talk
so
about
much.
AI?
These are
I think that
really huge topics, and I don't think we really
Yeah.
have too much
no,
time to
I was
delve
just saying
deep
we
into
can
it.
talk about. We should choose which one, but I was kind of going over all three that we could talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's because it's at an hour now. I think it's good that we've just talked about or like introduced some implications. I feel like if we were to talk about them, it'll add like another 40 minutes to this
Right, time
conversation.
flies. I can't believe it's been an hour.
Yeah, it's been over an
Jeez.
hour.
Oh my God. Okay. Um. All right. So I guess we'll
But
skip.
when it comes to like all those things though, like isn't it true that like technically all those things, all those slides that we just saw, like that rationalism is kind of our only approach to like anything kind of metaphysical, anything that doesn't like exist like purely in the physical world? Because I mean like how would we be able to develop empirical research on like
Mm,
consciousness, even just in
and
general?
theoretical things.
You know, when so much of it is not observable by our immediate senses in empirical ways, you know? I think in
Yeah.
a way, rationalism is our only way
But I
when it
feel
comes to
like
anything like
I feel like I don't understand
that.
rationalism fully, but I get what you I just think that like it's there's probably way more than just rationalism than
Mm-hmm.
like for example, if you had like a psychedelic experience, that's not really
Mm-hmm.
rational, is it? I don't know.
Interesting.
But it's
Yep.
like that way of acquiring knowledge is like repeatable and testable and is it empirical? I don't know, but
No, I mean, you experience the psychedelic experience, but then wouldn't you have to rationalize, like you use your rational mind to
mm,
understand the experiences? But I
That's
do
a
agree,
good
that's kind of
point.
an interesting point though,
yeah.
that
There is something
like there
else.
are, yeah.
Like, because if
This
you're in a state of ego death where it's like you don't even like you don't have a framework to rationalize off of, you're just like in a state of like extreme
Mm-hmm.
oneness and presence and experience, then
Mm-hmm.
like how is knowledge generated and how are your beliefs affected when you're not part of it? Like Yasmin is
and to
not
go a
part of
step
this.
further, to go a step further, I was reading as the past week I wrote about Buddhism more than I have in the past, and the end goal being enlightenment, in which there is no experiencer at all anymore. So it's like one
Mm,
step further from what you're saying, where you're one with the world and you're
yeah.
experiencing everything. And then what
That's
knowledge
true.
is that? And I spoke to somebody recently who is very interesting, and I was like just trying to rationalize enlightenment and like what it's like to be enlightened and
Hmm.
what that experience is like, because what is the experience of experiencelessness? Like
Mm,
that's something you can't rationalize, and you definitely can't empiricize that one
hmm.
because you're not having any senses at all. So definitely there's a lot of
There's yeah,
knowledge
different
formation
ways.
methods outside of those.
Yeah.
Mm, well,
Fascinating.
That's what I kind of believe. Another belief of mine personally is that I believe that like kind of knowledge and truth are things that can only exist like in the very present of like the moment of like when that knowledge or
mm,
truth is, you know,
I
like in
agree.
that very immediate context. But I think that's kind of the idea of just kind of like, is it possible to have knowledge in the very present? And is that like what enlightenment is? Feeling like
Ooh,
just fully true, fully just like true in the very exact
yeah,
moment,
I think that is
whatever
such
that
a
means.
good point because like a lot of people are kind of deconstructing this myth of time that there is no past or future, like all there is the now, and that's kind of what enlightenment is like absolute presence and like integration with now and like the experiences. And I think that is where capital T truth comes in, is like when you can
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
obtain knowledge from that space of like absolute presence, when you're not affected by past or future, because that doesn't even exist. Once you've been enlightened, you
Mm-hmm.
realize like there's no that isn't like the time isn't real, it's just the present moment. And then the observer effect maybe shifts because like with observation, it's like from T0 to T1, what is the change? And you're observing that. But if there's no T equals, if it's just T, does that make sense? And it's like,
Oh my god.
I think that's a
That's a
good
crazy
place to end
one.
it, to be honest.
yeah, let's just leave it on that cliff.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks for tuning in, folks.
What we gonna? I mean, I don't. Well, actually, see now. See, I don't know. Okay, how about our final question that we all have to answer? Do you believe in universal truths,
Yes,
or is that not a good final? Okay.
I
Yeah.
believe
See,
I
I
in
mean, I
think
it.
feel
it's
like
good
either
because
answer is right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's good because we started that way, so it's a good way to wrap it around.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel
Yes.
like I personally do not believe in. I don't believe in universal truths, but I believe in like I believe that your own universal truths about the world. You know,
I
for
think
me, all knowledge is about like for me, I see knowledge as all kind of based on your personal situation and your context
I was in
at the
agreement
moment
with you,
of
Sam,
knowledge.
100% going into this, and after this last 5 to 10 minutes, I'm definitely questioning that stance.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna read a lot more about Buddhism and get back
Mhm.
to you.
I just want to make a little rebuttal to you, Sam, because I think
Mhm.
when we have individual truths, that's you're believing that we are separate and that we are
Mhm.
individuals. But if we believe in oneness and that it is like the universe is an expression through us, through our different bodies, and we're all made of the same substance, like the hand thing, how it's like we're all the same thing, then it's like I think that's why there is truth, because even though for us personally as little fingers we're experiencing something different, we're all like still cut from the same cloth and it's all like the same fabric, and that the fabric is
Mhm.
that truth, and it's just cut in different ways. And then that's, but rather than believing in the shape of the fabric, the truth is that there is a fabric. If that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm. See, I wasn't saying that I don't believe in universal
Yeah.
truths exactly. I just I mean like see like personally I have my own universal truths about the world and like
Yeah.
but I don't know. I don't think that because this just comes into a conversation with language, of course. It's all just
Yeah.
language makes everything confusing, right?
Mm.
But I mean, I feel like that's an important point, of course. So like we really are all just created of the same stuff. And that in
That
itself makes you question, like kind of the idea of separation between anything,
hmm
right? But
This is
I don't
making me
know.
excited. I really want to talk about like the energy aspect of this now, I
Perfect.
think,
That's the
for
next
next
episode.
podcast.
Done. Yep.
Yay! Oh, I'm literally just gonna re-listen to this and then like take what we said and make better decisions because
Perfect.
I wish we could unpick this more. Oh,
Yep. Looking forward to unpacking it further.
Good
Um,
conversation today. Long
yeah,
one.
maybe should
yeah,
I do like a 30-second recap of what we talked
yeah,
about?
of course.
Okay. So we started off defining, well, talking and going on a really long tangent about capital T and lowercase truth, in which we concluded that capital T truth, well, I guess I can go back to what you said, Yaz, about capital T truth being before reach the truth that is universal before going through the human, to which we output lowercase truth. And then we moved on after a long tangent to introducing rationalism and concluding that they're not mutually exclusive, and talking about other forms of reasoning like tea leaves and the shared flaw in reasoning that tea leaves and empiricism have. And then we went over some of the implications that all of these different forms of reasoning have. And I feel like we talked about something else really big just now regarding. Well, you'll have to listen to the
Yeah.
entire podcast to know what we covered in the last 10 minutes that were groundbreaking. That was something that I don't think I can summarize in a few sentences. And
Mm.
next week, Our next podcast episode, we'll be talking about energy stemming from the conversation that we had today.
Yay! Good shit, guys. All
Thanks for
right.
tuning in.
Big love. See you next time. Bye.